Hi, I'm Iain Mean and welcome to the University of West of England to the last of their Distinguished Address Series. The subject this evening, the man I'm going to be interviewing, is Sir Howard Davies. Sir Howard is probably one of the most qualified men in British business. He holds so many titles you wouldn't believe, but he's chairman currently of the Royal Bank of Scotland and the architect of the latest report on London Airport. So Howard, can you give me your view on the Governor of the Bank of England's remarks yesterday? He was quite worried about Brexit. Are you?
Well, I read his letter to Andrew Tyree, who's the chair of the Treasury Select Committee in Parliament, and I think it was a very careful letter. It built off a report the bank did a couple of months ago on the economic implications of Brexit, and essentially focused on what I think the bank should focus in, which is it going to create instability, is there a risk to the financial system, etc. And I found, when I read the letter, and indeed the paper, that it was an extremely balanced and careful assessment, and said that in the short run it creates quite a degree of uncertainty, because nobody knows whether we're going to be in or out, and if we're out, nobody knows what kind of deal we would be able to negotiate. So what he's pointing out is that there are risks to the City of London, and risks to banks, and they've put in place some special funding arrangements if banks need money which they can't get in the market. And I think it was very balanced. He does not say vote leave or vote remain. He says in the long run we can't be sure what the impact on the British economy has been, but he says in the short run there's going to be nervousness and uncertainty, and that is certainly our assessment at RBS. We've looked at it, and we believe that it's unwelcome in the short term because it is creating uncertainty about investment and uncertainty about the City of London. We recognise that there are other issues at stake here. People may be voting on immigration, which is not a matter for a bank, I think, to advise people on. No. And we don't know in the long run how the British economy is going to develop. But I think the Bank of England is quite right to warn that in the short run there could be consequences.
And what about the long term?
Well, I think it's very difficult to know because you don't know what it is you're going to get. If we voted no, and if we then went to negotiate, and if the rest of Europe said, oh, let's just carry on more or less as it was before, except that you're out, but we'll have a free trade agreement. And if then all the companies in the UK said, well, let's stay here because this looks fine, then I guess it would be a pretty much of a non-event. But you'll have noticed quite a lot of ifs in that sentence. Yeah. And the market doesn't like ifs, really.
Right, you've got a lot of ifs. What's your personal view?
My personal view is that it is not for me as the chairman of Royal Bank of Scotland to tell people how to exercise their democratic vote. What I think the bank can do is to advise its clients on how to protect themselves against risk. So we're spending a lot of time with companies looking at hedging their exchange rate risk, because you've probably seen the pound has been falling. Yeah. We're spending a lot of time with our clients who are saying, who've got money to invest, talking to them about how they can balance their investments and avoid their risks. I think that's what the bank should do, rather than trying to tell people how to vote.
Are you holding off, Howard, on investment choices yourself and advising your clients to do the same?
We are not doing that because we are now almost entirely a domestic UK and Irish bank. And so for us, our commitment is to the British economy. It's not that we are thinking about positioning ourselves in broader Europe. The RBS has retrenched quite considerably in the last few years, as you know, to become primarily a large UK commercial and retail bank.
And a lot of your customers are really good SMEs, aren't they?
Indeed.
The heartblood, the heartthrob of British business. So are they bothered about Brexit?
Depends. Some are absolutely not. If you are running a hotel in Cornwall, which is largely domestic, business, and where, insofar as you get foreign tourists, you might get more if the pound falls, which seems kind of likely, then I can't see why you should be worried about it. Indeed, you might even welcome it. If, however, you are a automotive parts manufacturer, or as in this part of the world, somebody like GKN making aircraft parts, dependent heavily on the export market, I think you're more nervous, because you say, well, if we leave, what will the deal be? Will we have tariffs on our exports? Will we not? So I think those businesses are quite nervous, which is why most of the business groups, when they come together and survey their members, on balance, they tend to say, better the devil you know.
Yeah. Now, you're talking this evening about evolution or revolution in the whole of the financial markets. You've had great experience of that. Do you feel the government's been tough enough with some of our errant financiers?
The government has been, well, not the government exactly, the regulators have been tough with the banks in terms of capital. And RBS has probably got 3 times as much capital as it used to have. And so that has been quite difficult for banks to manage, and has had some consequences in terms of availability of bank finance, because you can't both keep reserves and lend them, you have to do one or the other. So I think the regulators have been very tough on the banks, yeah.
But what about individuals? We've seen no one go to jail.
This is a difficult argument. In order to send people to jail, as I understand it, you have to commit a crime. Just losing money is not on the whole enough to convince a judge that you should go to jail. So the question is, what crimes did people commit? Now, in some areas, it's quite clear that they did. And there's one LIBOR trader who was fiddling the LIBOR rates, who is in jail, and for quite a long time, actually. And there are some others too. And so when people have committed an actual crime, and it was proved that they did it deliberately, which is again what you have to do in a court case, then they have gone to jail. I think the thing that people worry about is they say, well, hang on, people cause massive losses, and why shouldn't they be punished? Well, the difficulty is that that's not yet criminal to lose money. If you did it by making mistakes, by being over-optimistic, by being particularly stupid. If you could go to jail for being stupid, there'd be a lot of people in jail. And so, what is it? I can understand people's emotion and anger about it, but going to jail, you have to commit a crime. And what has not so far been proved is that the people who were responsible for these disasters actually did it deliberately with knowledge of forethought, and actually broke some law, as opposed to being super optimistic and very foolish.
Now, what about RBS? You took on that, some say, big poison chalice for you. What's the timetable now to bring that back into some sort of proper order?
Yeah. Well, the government have said that they want by sometime in the early 2020s to be out of this thing. To sell it back to ordinary shareholders. And I think that's a reasonable objective. Precisely when is not so clear. The government sold 5% last summer. At the moment, of course, as you will know, the market for bank shares is not great. Our share prices have fallen, but exactly like Barclays and HSBC and Standard Chartered and practically everybody else. So at the moment, it doesn't look like a great time to be selling shares. And there are some specific things in the case of RBS which have to be dealt with. We still have some actions against us by the US authorities in relation to subprime mortgages dating right back to 2005, 6, 7. And it would be good to get those out of the way. And there are some other issues that we have to deal with. We've got to get Williams and Glyn separated from the bank. That was a condition of state aid in 2008, imposed by the European Commission. We're in the process of doing that. Our target is to get that done by the end of next year. So there are one or two specific things that we need to get done before the bank can be said to be kind of cleaned up for the future, and that will affect the timing of government share sales.
Now, you're in the southwest here. You've had some meetings today with your colleagues here in Bristol.
Yeah.
Tell us about the southwest in terms of RBS. Sometimes the southwest to me seems to be forgotten. We hear a lot about the northern powerhouse, not a lot about the southwest powerhouse.
Yes, George Osborne has a constituency up in the northwest, and I'm sure that's not completely unrelated to it. In this region, we're doing pretty well, actually. I was with our teams today. Our private banking, we own Coutts Bank, which has got a big operation in Bristol. That's doing well. Our business lending is growing. After quite a long period when business lending has declined and been kind of flat, partly because businesses were nervous about borrowing and they sort of hoarded cash because they'd been bitten in the recession. But now business volumes are growing, leasing business is growing, invoice financing is growing. Not hugely rapidly, but definitely up on last year. Unemployment in this region is low and falling. Here it's pretty good actually. The southwest region is doing very well. Now, in some ways, you say about the northern powerhouse. I mean, when a region needs government assistance when it's not doing so well, and inevitably governments don't really bother. I mean, you don't, for example, get lots of government money to invest in businesses in London, because they generate themselves. I can remember when I ran the London School of Economics, talking to a group of vice chancellors about regional development funds, and they said, "How much money do you get?" I said, "I didn't even know there was one. There's never been anything for the London universities." But so I think Bristol is in an area where it's doing very well on its own 2 feet, and probably doesn't need a kind of targeted government program. The economy is nicely diversified, growing reasonably well. Skill base is good. People are bringing businesses out from London because property prices are somewhat lower and the skills are available in the local community. I think it's pretty good shape.
And you're speaking at UWE this evening. I mean, UWE is a big operation, big university, has a big reputation of getting students into work very quickly. Do you think that's important?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think that universities, particularly now that the fees are rather higher than they used to be, I think the student as consumer, if you like, demands a better service on things like careers. There's a lot of nonsense talked about sometimes about students as consumers. I think students understand that some of the time they're at university, they're a student, they're learning, and they don't expect that the professor should make it really easy for them because they're paying. They understand that. They're here to learn, and that could be difficult. But in terms of the other services, like careers advice or like indeed residences or the food, if they're paying £9,000 a year, they think, well, the standard should be kind of reasonable. And if I go, I should have a careers department that actually knows about job opportunities and can help me. And so there, I think, the pressure on universities to get better at that has grown as the fees have grown. And a university like UWE and a lot of the other former polytechnics who traditionally had a much closer linkage to the local employers than universities, I think are quite well placed in that area. Many traditional universities never really did that. That wasn't what they saw themselves as doing. So I think universities like UWE are quite well placed, actually.
Yeah. I must ask you about London Airport. Will anything ever happen there?
Well, I hope so. I think...
you produced a big report.
Yeah, I did. I spent 3 years of my life on it, and I think the case is a very powerful one. London is booming, as you know. But in fact, also, when I travelled around, including to Bristol, actually, during the course of the work, the demands in the regions for new routes out of London Heathrow is quite strong. Cardiff is very keen to have a route there, which it doesn't have now, and they believe that's quite important for them to link into international routes. And so I think the case for it is very strong. At the moment, the government have deferred a decision, which is not for the first time, till the other side of the referendum. But I'm hopeful that after the referendum, whatever the outcome, that a positive decision will be made.
Now, you yourself, you continue to work like crazy. You've got a huge CV. You're going to keep working?
For the moment, I lack imagination about what else to do. So yes, I'm committed to. I've signed on for this job, and I've been principal for 5 years. We'll see. And I continue to teach at a university in France, actually, and I'm on the board of the Prudential, and I chair a library in London, the London Library. So yeah, I keep myself off the street, and I enjoy it. And so at the moment, I still feel fit enough to carry on.
And a big message for the government, your personal message.
Well, I think that the government should be bolder on things like the Heathrow and the big infrastructure investments. I think whatever happens on the referendum, I think the country's going to need a clear direction, even if we're going to have this great big debate, and God knows where it'll come out. But particularly if we're out, I think we're going to need a new direction. We're going to need some impetus, some big projects. I think that's what the government needs to do. I think they need to be bold on issues like railway electrification, on HS2, on Heathrow. I think time for bold decisions is there.
Good. Thank you.